We were to hypothetically imagine that Meghan Markle was really coming. My thought process was she will absolutely be by Harry's side on Friday if he wins, but he's lost now. I don't think she wants to be on the arm of a loser. And what does Meghan Markle do when Harry's going through difficult times publicly? She disappears.
£50 million. That is the staggering cost figure being discussed around Prince Harry's failed legal battle with the Daily Mail Group. Not a clean win, not a public vindication, not even the kind of mixed result he could spin into something palatable for the American press. This was a brutal courtroom defeat, delivered on the exact same day Harry stood at Chatham House trying to promote the Invictus Games. And where was Meghan Markle during what commentators are calling the darkest week of her husband's public life? She was nowhere to be found. According to reports, she stayed in Portugal while Harry faced the collapse of his legal crusade alone. This is a woman who built her brand on partnership, on the power couple narrative, on standing beside her man against the forces of darkness. Yet when the forces of darkness actually showed up in the form of a high court ruling that left Harry's judgment and credibility under brutal public scrutiny, Meghan apparently had somewhere else to be. Royal commentator Kinsey Schofield put it bluntly when she said that Meghan does not want to be on the arm of a loser. That assessment sounds harsh until you examine the pattern. That is the part that makes this story bigger than one bad court day. If Meghan had simply skipped a routine engagement, nobody would care. If Harry had simply lost one procedural argument, the story might have stayed inside the legal pages. But the optics here are more personal than that. Harry built his entire post-royal life around the idea that he and Meghan were inseparable. A modern partnership. Two people protecting each other from a hostile institution and a hostile press. That was the brand, that was the promise. They told the world they were not just husband and wife. They were a unit. They were a mission. They were the love story strong enough to survive the palace, the tabloids, the lawsuits, the family rift, the public ridicule, and the money pressure. And yet the moments that test that promise keep producing the same visual. Harry alone, Harry explaining, Harry defending, Harry absorbing the humiliation while Meghan is either silent, absent, or operating on a completely different track. That is why the MIA angle lands.
History teaches us that if you are not of use to the Duchess of Sussex, you're in a very lonely place. And that looks like the place where Harry is right now.
It is not because Meghan has to attend every meeting Harry attends. Of course she does not. It is not because a wife must stand beside her husband every time he has a difficult professional day. That would be ridiculous. The issue is that Harry's difficult days are not ordinary professional setbacks. They are the public collapse of the very narrative the Sussexes sold for years. When his lawsuits fail, when his security arguments collapse, when his relationship with the royal family looks colder than ever, those are not just Harry stories, they are Sussex brand stories. They raise the question of whether the couple is still operating as a genuine team, or whether the team only appears when the cameras are flattering and the outcome looks useful. That is why the source clip matters. The criticism was not simply Meghan was not physically standing next to Harry. The criticism was sharper. When times are tough, she goes missing. That phrase is damaging because it turns absence into a pattern. It invites viewers to look backward. Where was she when Spare became a global punchline? Where was she when late-night comedians turned Harry's frostbitten confessions into material? Where was she when the security case became another reminder that the royal door was not reopening on his terms? And now, where was she when the Daily Mail defeat landed with the force of a public verdict on his entire anti-press crusade? Once people start asking those questions, the story stops being about geography and starts being about loyalty. When Harry was promoting Spare and Jimmy Kimmel was tearing into him on late-night television, Meghan vanished from the promotional circuit. When Harry sat down with the BBC after losing his first security case and proceeded to attack the royal family, Meghan was mysteriously absent. When the original Ravek verdict came down denying Harry government-funded protection, she was nowhere near him.
Meghan had always stood back from these cases. Meghan very shrewdly realized taking on the media was not clever. She urged Harry not to become involved in these cases.
And now, facing what Tom Bower calls reputational suicide, Harry finds himself alone in a country he once called home, locked out of Buckingham Palace, rejected by the courts, and apparently unable to count on his wife showing up when it matters most. The contrast with Harry's behavior during Meghan's difficult moments could not be more stark. Remember the Oprah interview? Harry sat right beside her, holding her hand, backing up every claim she made about the royal family. Remember the Me You Can't See documentary where Harry described Meghan crying herself to sleep? He put himself front and center as her protector, her defender, her shield against the world. He has spent years positioning himself as the man who gave up everything for love, who walked away from duty and family because protecting Meghan was more important than any crown. Yet the protection appears to flow in only one direction. The week that broke Harry began well before the verdict. On Friday, palace officials set a deadline for Harry to confirm whether he would accept the king's generous offer to stay at Buckingham Palace. This offer had been on the table for weeks, maybe months. Harry had been planning this trip since January, and throughout that time the invitation remained open. On Saturday, Harry rejected the offer. Then, likely after his security team pointed out that there is no safer location in London than inside the walls of Buckingham Palace, Harry changed his mind. He called back and said yes, actually, he would like to stay there after all. The palace said no. A royal aide told reporters that the king was not willing to be pushed around nor indulge a constant state of chaos. That word keeps appearing in every account of this visit, chaos. The Sussexes have become synonymous with it. Palace staff had been preparing for a family of 4 plus an entourage. They had arranged chefs, housekeeping, food and beverage service, and additional security personnel. When Harry announced the children were not coming, then Meghan was not coming, then it would just be him. The logistics became a nightmare. Staff who had been stood down would need to be called back in. Hospitality arrangements for 4 people would need to be reconfigured for 1. And the palace, which functions more as an office building and construction site than a livable home, would need to accommodate someone who could not even confirm his plans until after the deadline had passed. Rob Shooter described the scene on his podcast by saying that their brand is chaos. He compared them to a naughty puppy that keeps peeing in the hallway because it gets attention every time. The king, Shooter noted, is a nice man but not a strong man, and Harry has learned that screaming and stamping his feet often gets results. But this time, the king held firm. This time, patience snapped. The Buckingham Palace briefing that followed broke with decades of royal protocol. Never complain, never explain has been the monarchy's guiding principle for generations. Yet the palace released an extraordinarily detailed timeline of exactly what happened, down to the day and hour of Harry's rejections and reversals. They wanted the public to know that this mess was not their fault. They wanted everyone to understand that Harry created this situation through his own indecision and entitlement. That a sitting monarch would authorize such a detailed public rebuke of his own son tells you everything about how severely the relationship has deteriorated. And then came Tuesday, the courtroom catastrophe. The court rejected Harry's claims against Associated Newspapers in sweeping terms, according to the commentary around the case. For viewers watching from the outside, the damaging part was not just that Harry lost. It was that the ruling created a brutal public perception problem around his judgment, his legal strategy, and the credibility of the case he chose to bring. For someone who has spent the last year trying to rebuild his authority through speeches about Ukraine, articles about anti-Semitism, and positioning himself as a serious global figure, that kind of courtroom defeat is devastating. Harry's response was predictable and damaging. He called the verdict a complete and utter whitewash and accused the King's courts of bias. Standing beside Baroness Doreen Lawrence, Harry released a statement claiming that when the court says there is not sufficient evidence of wrongdoing despite documents showing otherwise, then one does wonder how justice was ever going to be achieved. He basically accused the British legal system of corruption because it did not rule in his favor. Tom Bower called this reputational suicide, and the description fits. Harry is now a man who attacks judges when they rule against him, who accuses courts of whitewashes, who positions himself as a victim of establishment conspiracies. This is the same man who wrote a book bragging about killing 25 Taliban fighters, detailed his drug use for the world, and described losing his virginity in such specific terms that the woman involved was publicly identified and humiliated. Paul Dacre, the editor-in-chief of the Daily Mail, observed that there is not a laundry in the cosmos big enough to wash all the dirty linen Harry has aired about his own family. For him to complain about his privacy being invaded takes not just the biscuit but the whole tin. The bitter irony is that Harry's mother, Princess Diana, actually liked the Daily Mail. Dacre revealed that they would speak and meet regularly. The Mail's royal reporter was her friend and confidant. Diana used the paper strategically during her acrimonious breakup with Charles. The organization Harry just accused of running an illegal operation against him was one his mother trusted and cultivated. Meghan Markle was not present for any of the 11-week trial. She did not fly over to support Harry's testimony in January. She did not appear at any point during the proceedings. Kinsey Schofield identified the pattern clearly. When times are tough for Harry, Meghan goes missing in action. She is nowhere to be found. Neil Sean reported from London that behind the scenes at Chatham House, the situation was even worse than the public footage suggested. According to his source, Harry was toing and froing in a very bad way. Those seated in the room described him as literally quivering and mumbling. He stayed an hour after his speech for a private meeting with his lawyer, then needed a separate private room to call Meghan. The man who craves privacy so desperately that he sued newspapers for allegedly invading it was suddenly huddled in an unchecked room having emotional conversations while trying to process the magnitude of his defeat. Sean noted that Meghan has become the mother figure in Harry's life, the person he turns to for soothing words and emotional regulation. But on this day, the mother figure could not be bothered to show up in person. According to the source, Harry appeared nearly on the point of tears, like a little boy gibbering, trying to steady himself through a phone call with a wife who remained thousands of miles away. This will play badly for Meghan on the world stage, Sean predicted. She has tossed aside her own father in his hour of need, and now she appears to have done something similar to her husband. The man she calls a handsome fox, the man she claims is everything, faced his darkest public moment alone. The children have nannies. She could have left them for a few hours. She chose not to. The brand calculation behind this absence reveals something important about how Meghan approaches her partnership with Harry. She pushed back against his legal battles from the beginning. She knew they were risky. In her own case against the Mail on Sunday regarding her letter to Thomas Markle, she got lucky. The judges gave her the benefit of the doubt, calling her contradictory testimony an unfortunate lapse of memory rather than what it might otherwise be called. She was shrewd enough to realize that continuing to litigate was dangerous. Tom Bower confirmed this assessment. Meghan realized her victory was a stroke of luck. She wanted to dip out while she still looked like a winner. Harry, thick as he is according to Bower, kept pushing. He threw his dice in with David Sherborne and the lawyers who had been on a gravy train earning tens of millions of pounds through these cases. They kept encouraging him even when the evidence was thin, even when the claims were stale, even when pushing forward meant risking exactly the outcome he just received. The children became part of this calculation in a particularly disturbing way. According to sources close to Harry, Archie and Lilibet were told months ago that they were coming to England. They were beside themselves with excitement. They have been hopping up and down about coming here. Harry and Meghan told them about the UK, built up their anticipation, let them dream about meeting their grandfather who happens to be king. Then they pulled the trip. Using children as emotional use against King Charles is one thing. Using them as props in a media strategy only to disappoint them is something else entirely. You do not tell young children for months that they are going on a magical trip to meet royalty and then cancel because you are unhappy about security arrangements you were never going to receive in the first place. That is not protecting your children. That is conditioning them to become instruments in your ongoing war with your family. The financial reckoning from this verdict could be severe. Associated Newspapers is claiming costs of £50 million according to the commentary around the case. Whether Harry personally pays that figure, whether insurers or legal arrangements absorb part of it, and how the final cost picture shakes out are separate questions. But the headline alone is damaging enough. It puts money pressure back at the center of the Sussex story. Harry's actual wealth remains unclear. The Montecito mansion has a mortgage on it. The house was not purchased outright. The Netflix deal that was supposed to fund their independent life has produced little of note since the documentary. Spotify famously parted ways with them. Archwell Foundation accounts remain unpublished, so nobody knows how much money actually flows through their charitable enterprise. The commercial ventures Meghan has launched, from the lifestyle brand to the jam company, have generated more ridicule than revenue. Bower assessed the situation brutally. The lawyers have been on a gravy train. Harry was used by them. He did not realize until today the trouble he is in because this is not just a defeat in a civil case. This is Harry facing a very public courtroom defeat in the King's Court, with critics now questioning the judgment behind the case and the advice that led him there. Paul Dacre raised serious questions about the legal advice Harry received. This trumped-up action, Dacre said, which has cost well over £50 million and wasted a huge amount of valuable court time, should never have been brought to trial. That it did raises deeply disturbing questions about the conduct of elements of the legal profession. The Invictus Games were supposed to be Harry's redemption tour. This visit was meant to generate positive headlines about veterans, about service, about the announcement that Birmingham would host the 2027 Games. Instead, the Games have been buried beneath an avalanche of chaos. The noise Harry generates drowns out the actual cause he claims to champion. Kinsey Schofield reported that Invictus leadership has been frustrated and stressed about the Sussex presence for months. There were concerns that Meghan would turn the games into the Meghan show, changing outfits multiple times during single-day visits while wounded veterans competed for attention. The pattern mirrors what happened with Sentebale, the charity Harry founded in memory of his mother. Dr. Sophie Chandoka warned that the toxic Sussex brand drove fundraising down. Sponsors like Audi pulled out. The charity struggled to generate any revenue because association with Harry and Meghan had become commercially radioactive. Tom Bower documented this extensively in his book Betrayal, and watching the Invictus Games coverage get swallowed by legal defeat and palace drama, the parallel is impossible to ignore. The veterans deserve more. Harry would probably agree with that statement if asked. Yet his inability to control the chaos surrounding his own life means the veterans never get the spotlight they earned through their sacrifice. Every story about disabled service members competing with courage and determination gets buried beneath another headline about Harry's latest grievance. The royal family's response to this week has been studied and deliberate. On the same day the briefing war erupted over Buckingham Palace, King Charles appeared at a tank museum in his shirt sleeves, wearing a helmet, being driven around in a Challenger 2 battle tank. The image could not have been more intentional. While Harry complained about being locked out and losing in court, his father looked like he had just walked off the Top Gun set. The Princess of Wales visited Evelina Children's Hospital to support a £100 million fundraising campaign for a new children's facility. Photographs emerged from her Three Peaks Challenge, a striking achievement for someone who was undergoing chemotherapy just 2 years ago. Queen Camilla appeared in the Winnie the Pooh forest talking about children's literacy. Every member of the senior royal family hit what commentators called top royal notes, doing the bread-and-butter work that defines the monarchy's purpose. The contrast was intentional. Palace officials understand that Harry's chaos will dominate headlines regardless of what they do. Their response is to provide alternative imagery, alternative stories, alternative examples of royal duty being performed without drama or complaint. They cannot stop Harry from generating noise, but they can ensure that anyone looking for the real work of the monarchy knows where to find it. The palace statement about the Buckingham Palace situation broke decades of precedent. Never Complain, Never Explain gave way to a detailed timeline demonstrating exactly how Harry's indecision created this mess. That the king authorized such a public rebuke indicates a fundamental shift in how the institution plans to handle Sussex chaos going forward. They will not absorb the blame silently. They will document everything and release it when necessary. Prince William has been described as the firewall against Sussex rehabilitation. Sources say he has absolutely no intention of allowing any reconciliation that would bring Harry and Meghan back into the royal orbit. The damage they have inflicted, from the Oprah interview to Spare to the constant briefing wars, has exhausted whatever goodwill might have remained. William watches his children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, and sees their futures. He will not allow the toxic brand his brother has cultivated to contaminate the next generation. The briefings about Project Thaw, the supposed behind-the-scenes reconciliation effort, have been exposed as nonsense by this week's events. You do not lock someone out of Buckingham Palace and release detailed timelines of their failures if you are trying to bring them back into the fold. The king may love his son, may want to see his grandchildren, but he is not willing to sacrifice the institution or his own health to accommodate endless chaos. Bower believes the king's best strategy now is total distance. Make it clear to Harry that the Sussexes are not welcome at all in Britain for a very, very long time. Harry will have to reflect on how to reorganize the next few decades of his life. The pristine image is gone. The credibility is gone. What remains in the eyes of his harshest critics is a man approaching his mid-40s who burned bridges, attacked allies, and now faces another public blow to his credibility in the courts of his own country. Rob Shuter issued a warning that deserves attention. He framed the Sussexes as a ticking time bomb and argued that money pressure can push public figures toward increasingly questionable commercial opportunities. That is his commentary, not a proven plan. But the broader point is hard to ignore. When a brand relies on attention, lawsuits, royal grievance, and celebrity access, every financial setback makes the next deal more consequential. The royal family has already seen what happens when money pressure, ego, and questionable associations collide. The Sussexes face their own version of that reputational risk, only with higher media profiles and far less institutional protection. Tom Bower delivered the harshest verdict of all when asked whether Meghan bears responsibility for Harry's current state. Critics cast Meghan as a deeply divisive influence, Bower said without hesitation. He called her bad because she only thinks of herself. She is focused exclusively on self-promotion and self-aggrandizement. profits for her, and she does not care who gets damaged along the way. She has behaved disgracefully, never made amends, used Harry, and abused the royal family. The marriage question hangs over everything. You cannot fail as publicly and as frequently as Harry and Meghan have failed professionally without it affecting things at home. The Netflix deal produced controversy rather than success. Spotify dropped them after minimal output. The legal battles have cost tens of millions with nothing to show. The charities face scandal and declining donations. The jam business became a punchline. At some point, the accumulated weight of failure has to strain even the strongest relationship. Yet Meghan will not share Harry's failures. She disappears when times get hard. She maintains her distance when the headlines turn negative. She stays in Portugal while he faces his worst day in a British courtroom. The partnership that was supposed to conquer the world together only seems to function when victory is on the table. Kinsey Schofield noted the California laws that could shape their future. That does not mean a divorce is coming. It does not mean anyone has filed papers, hired lawyers, or made a formal move. What it does mean is that commentators are now openly discussing the marriage through the language of incentives, optics, and timing rather than romance. That is the shift. The story is no longer simply, are Harry and Meghan united against the world? The story has become, what does each of them gain by standing beside the other when the headlines turn ugly? Bauer, despite all his criticism, believes the couple will stay together. He thinks they are in love and that it is a solid bond. Perhaps being against the world forces you to cling to each other even when evidence suggests the partnership is unequal. Perhaps Harry genuinely has nowhere else to go, no one else who would have him after everything he has done. Perhaps Meghan calculates that the royal connection still has value, even when the royal drama becomes inconvenient. Perhaps Harry calculates that admitting the partnership has become lopsided would be more humiliating than simply carrying on. Those are not facts about their private marriage. They are the public questions created by the pattern viewers can actually see. What seems clear is that the current trajectory leads nowhere good, and the reason it leads nowhere good is that every option now carries a cost. If Meghan stands beside Harry too visibly, she inherits the stink of the legal loss, the £50 million headlines, the ridicule from commentators, and the image of a couple still fighting yesterday's wars. If she stays away, she protects her own brand in the short term, but reinforces the harshest criticism about her, that she wants the title, the platform, the royal proximity and the lifestyle, but not the fallout when Harry's choices detonate in public. That is the trap. Presence costs her. Absence costs him. For Harry, the optics are even worse. He used to walk into a room with the automatic authority of a prince. Now he walks into rooms carrying the baggage of every bridge burned behind him. He cannot lean comfortably on the palace, because the palace has learned to keep its distance. He cannot lean on the British public, because too many people believe he spent years insulting them while asking for their sympathy. He cannot lean on the press, because the press is now both his enemy and the mirror reflecting his defeats back at him. So the one place he should be able to lean is the marriage. That is what makes Meghan's absence so powerful as a story device. It suggests, fairly or unfairly, that even the one alliance Harry chose above all others may not be available when the spotlight turns unflattering. And this is where the title earns its weight. Meghan going MIA is not just a gossip beat, it is a question about utility. When Harry was useful as the prince who could open royal doors, he was central to the brand. When Harry's trauma could sell interviews, books, documentaries, and sympathetic magazine covers, he was central to the brand. When Harry's family drama could generate attention, he was central to the brand. But when Harry becomes the man who lost to the Daily Mail, the man facing brutal legal costs, the man reportedly unable to get the meeting he wanted with his father, the man commentators describe as isolated and humiliated, suddenly the partnership appears less visible. That is the pattern critics are pointing to, and that is why this story has legs. The losses are mounting. The courtroom defeat, the rejection from Buckingham Palace, the ongoing estrangement from William, the cancelled children's visit, the patrons withdrawing from charities, the sponsors abandoning causes, the credibility evaporating with each fresh headline. Harry once had a role. He had a purpose. He had people who looked up to him, veterans who saw him as one of their own, charities that benefited from his involvement, a grandmother who needed him during her final years. He walked away from all of it for a woman who, according to every observable pattern, disappears when things get difficult. The military work mattered. The charity patronages mattered. The Commonwealth duties mattered. Millions of people found meaning in what Harry represented as a working royal who understood service and sacrifice. He threw that away because he believed Meghan's vision of their future was better than the future his family offered. 5 years later, that vision has produced courtroom humiliations, family estrangement, commercial failures, and a wife who, critics argue, did not appear publicly beside him to fly over when he needed her most. A partnership that only works in victory is not a partnership at all. It is a transaction where one party provides value only when convenient. Harry provided the royal connections, the platform, the access, the credibility that came from being born into the most famous family on earth. What has Meghan provided in return? A strategy of permanent warfare that has alienated every potential ally, a media approach that generates attention but destroys reputation, a business model that produces headlines rather than revenue, and an absence precisely when her presence might have mattered. The image of Harry at Chatham House trying to hold himself together while his legal dreams collapsed around him, while his wife remained thousands of miles away, while his father refused to let him into Buckingham Palace, tells you everything about where this story is heading. He looked to critics like a man caught between two lives, no longer fully royal, not fully independent, and increasingly forced to explain why the partnership that was supposed to make every sacrifice worthwhile seems to go quiet whenever the sacrifice becomes expensive. The losses are mounting. The credibility is gone. The money may soon follow, and Meghan Markle, the woman Harry gave up everything to protect, cannot seem to find time in her schedule to stand beside him when the world watches his reputation crumble. Sound off in the comments, and if this is your first time here, subscribe. You will want to be here for what is coming.